One of the more difficult shots to get on the front of the home is one that never receives sunlight, either because the sun never hits the front of the house or there's trees or other obstacles blocking the sun. In this case, the trees were blocking the sun from the front of the house. It was totally possible that the sun could hit the front, except there was trees blocking this. So what happens is it's just not conducive for great real estate photography. But I'm going to show you how to use Adobe Raw to make the shot a little bit more acceptable and a little bit more pleasing. Now right here we have the exposure of the house, where the exposure for the house down in the deep shadows looks pretty good, but the rest of the scene is blown out, and even on the house we're starting to blow out the highlights, making extremely bright spots. It ends up being very washy. It doesn't really stand out on your thumbnails on Realtor.com or your MLS. So this would be exposed pretty good for the front of the house, but it's not the most pleasing picture to look at. So we're going to go through what I typically do. We're going to look at, now this is usually what the camera would expose for pretty darn close. What I tend to do is expose for the highlights, where the highlights are just blowing out or barely blowing out, and this is shown by the red. And most DSLR cameras will show you where the highlights are blowing out. There's a setting on that. So it's alright to have a little bit of highlight blowing out, but I really, for the most part, want detail in the highlights. So we bring it into Camera Raw, which is part of either the full Adobe Photoshop, or even Adobe Elements has a Camera Raw. It might not be as powerful, but this is what you can do with Camera Raw to adjust for that. So we're going to try to balance out the scene a little bit better so the shadows on the house aren't so dark and we can still get blue sky. So first thing I do is I bring the shadows down, and you can watch the red until I'm getting detail in the highlights, and then I'm going to fiddle with the exposure. Well, first I'm going to fiddle with the shadows, bring the shadow a little bit and brighten up the shadows. You can see if I bring it all the way, that's too much. Colors just get weird on you. You want to try to go as about halfway. Then we're going to fiddle with the exposure, and what I'm looking for is just a decent exposure through the darkest shadows of the house. So we're going to bring up the exposure. Okay, so that looks pretty acceptable. We're starting to blow away the outside, and we can fix that by using the adjustment brush. And we can always go back and fiddle with it. One of the things about retouching in Camera Raw is it's non-destructive. You can always go back and fix, and you haven't ruined your photograph. So this is, the exposure on the house is looking acceptable, and we can still play with this more. So we're going to go to the adjustment brush. I want to set the brush size, so this is showing us where you can see the brush here. This is the area that's going to be affected by what we do. I'm going to scroll up. What I want to do is affect the exposure. So I'm going to come through here, along the road, around the trees and the sky. Basically, I want to get the sky and everything back in. And you can see we've darkened that down. We could even darken it down more by playing with the exposure. We can bring the highlights back up if need be, just in that section. Not seeing a whole lot of change there. Probably bring up the clarity a little bit. Oops. So we want to find clarity, bring the clarity up a little bit, and maybe bring the contrast down just a touch. And so now we've got a better balanced scene, and if we wanted to adjust just a little bit more, we can come back here. I'm seeing a little bit of red in the road. I'm gonna bring the tint down a little bit to green. Then I want to darken down the road a little bit more, but I think I want the house a little bit brighter. So we are going to adjust the exposure a little bit more. Nah, that's getting to be a little too much for me. Bring the highlights down more. Okay, I've got the exposure a little too bright, so we're just going to back off on that. We're about right there. We're still seeing the detail in the siding here. Looks pretty good. I want to go back, do a new adjustment brush. I'm going to do new, and I'm going to want to darken a little bit more. And so we've got the road brought down a little bit more, but it's a little too much. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. And so here we go. I think we're pretty much done. You can make your other adjustments in here if you sharpen and such, but now we have a pleasing photo that we can put into the MLS that will capture people's attention. Now for my MLS, I would end up cropping this into an 8x10 size. So we'll go like that and hit the button, and that's what we got. So we have a nice balanced photo. We still have the blue sky, which will catch people's attention. Hope you found this helpful.